Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Cody Miller, game designer and owner of Far Off Games. His company's raised millions of dollars on Kickstarter and has just completed their latest campaign for Aridia, The Paths We Dare Tread. Cody, welcome to the binge. How you doing, sir?
Oh man, James, thank you so much. I am doing fantastic.
You must be on cloud nine.
Yeah. Oh man. Absolutely.
Is this beyond your, like way beyond your expectations, would you say, or just kind of where you wanted, you're hoping, thought you could land?
Oh no, definitely. I mean, when we were coming into this project, we knew it was incredibly ambitious. And so we set our goal at like, here's what we need to actually do this thing. And if we can hit that goal, we're golden. And so anything over that has been, I mean, we almost doubled it, which was crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Just so for people listening, so $750,000, at least I think in Canadian. Anyway, was it $750 US or Canadian was the goal?
I think it was $720 US.
Okay, $720 US. So yeah, it'd be $750 Canadian.
Yeah.
That's a massive goal. I think that's probably one of the largest ones I've ever seen. So when I saw that, I'm like, were these guys just really confident, or they just actually know what this beast was gonna cost to make? And it's probably the latter. We're gonna get into the game components in a little bit. I think people are gonna be as blown away as I was. Like when I saw this, I was like, wow. Like what else could you throw at this? Like this guy's literally done everything.
Thank you.
But before we do that, so how long have you been in the industry? So you got into this industry how long ago?
So I started Far Off Games in 2013. Okay. So coming up on, or a little over 8 years now. So yeah.
And then when you started it, you were a game designer. Like what were you doing? Were you working somewhere when you did this?
Yeah. So my plan was, so I was in school for software development. So
nice.
We're pretty close to Portland here in Oregon in the US. And so my plan was, our plan was I was going to go to school, get my degree, and then we were going to move to Portland from our little town here on the coast. We were going to move to Portland and I was going to be a software developer. And during that time, I got really into board games. And as a hobby, I'd been designing this game called Zaya, which is kind of like a Han Solo simulator, basically.
That's awesome.
And so I spent just years designing it and then making my friends come play test it every couple months or whatever. And so when I was going to graduate, I talked to my wife and I said, hey, there's this new thing called Kickstarter. I started following it. I think I could put my game on there. And what I would love to do is before we move to Portland, can I do this project? It'll probably take a few months. And so she's awesome. And she agreed. She was like, yeah, go for it. Oh, so my goal was I'm going to make 1,000 copies of this game and not lose my house or my marriage.
Yeah.
And so, so we put it on Kickstarter, and that was also at the time like a very ambitious game because it had pre-painted miniatures, and nobody was doing that other than like Hasbro at the time. And so we put it on with a goal of $100,000, and people would jump on the Kickstarter and they're like, this looks awesome.
Yeah.
You're never going to fund. That's way too much. And so I couldn't cancel it. At that time, like it wouldn't let you cancel for whatever reason. And so I just felt like throwing up every night. I'm like, I don't know what I did. I'm so like, this is terrible. How are we going to make this? And then Tom Vassell did a video.
Yeah.
I sent him a preview copy, which was back when he doesn't do that anymore, but it was back when he did it. He watched it and he was like, you need to go out and back this. It's awesome. And he called me on the phone and like told me all the things that were wrong in the rule book. And and then people just started jumping on board, and we actually ended up like overfunding. And so from there, things just kind of snowballed, and I ran the numbers, and I was like, Abby's my wife. Abby, I think I could do this like for another year. Instead of moving to Portland, we could do this company. What do you think about that? I run it out of our bedroom. And she was like, okay, if you want to try it, I'm sure. And so that was sort of the start of Far Off Games. So
wow, that is awesome. And then of course you never look back. You're still doing it. And so with Zaya, there was, I think I saw like, was there like 4 different expansions and things like that. I think you've had like 4. Is it 4 campaigns in total around Zaya, or is there 3?
Yeah, I think we've done 3. Gosh, I think we've done 3 Zaya campaigns.
And then you had the
it's
surfing
hard for me
game
because we've reprinted a couple times.
Okay, yeah.
On our own without a Kickstarter.
Nice.
But yeah, so there's 2 expansions. So we've done 3 Kickstarter projects for Zaya. So the first one, and then we did Embers, which is like a full-on expansion. And then we were going to do a reprint of Embers, but it was so expensive. And Ira Fay, who designed the solo aspect of Zaya for the Embers expansion.
Yeah.
He was like, hey, let me do a mini expansion, just a deck of cards that'll give new missions and new powers. And so it's called Missions and Powers. And so we did that. And that was sort of the 3rd campaign for Zaya. So yeah, we've been on Kickstarter a lot.
Oh, that's crazy. And then you had another game. It was like a surfing game. I think it was called like Tavarua or something like that. Tavarua? Is that how you pronounce it?
Tavarua. Yeah, it's actually an island in Fiji.
Okay.
Which is like a surf mecca, basically. And so that game was not a commercial success, but my dad's a surfer. I live on the Oregon coast. And so I had just like designed this game for my dad. And for Zaya, it took me 9 years from like inception to like, all right, it's made. Tavarua took me about 45 minutes to design. I like sat down and like made it. And I was like, I think that's it. Okay. Yeah. And then I thought, oh, we'll just put it on Kickstarter and see. And I didn't realize, but there's maybe I should have realized, but in hindsight, there's a strong contingent of board gamers that don't gel with sports games.
Gotcha.
And so there are a lot of people who are like, I love Zaya, I love your game, but I can't do sports games. So we'll see you next Kickstarter. Which is fine. I didn't realize. They're like, I don't surf, so I don't think this game's for me. And it was a little confusing to me because I was like, do you make power grids or like? And there's like all these things where people are happy to like be a farmer in the 1800s or something, but surfing is like a sport, and so I learned a valuable lesson there.
I mean, still, I'm looking at your page right here, showing everybody else. I mean, you hit $32,000, 661 backers. There's a lot of people would be very happy with that campaign, right? Like that's like that's a pretty decent campaign. Clearly, it's smaller, right, than some of the other ones you've done. But I wouldn't call that necessarily a failure in terms of Kickstarter. What caught me off is when I look at your portfolio, right? And you see like kind of RPG, D&D, and then you see space, and then you've got like a surfing game kind of sandwiched in the middle there. It's like, where did this come from? But it's clear if there's this family tie into it, then I think that's pretty cool. You definitely have to follow your passion, and you know there's going to be a game for everybody. There was a Ascent. We had interviewed the team that did Ascent, which is a rock climbing game, right? And and it did quite well on Kickstarter as well too. So I think there's some people that might kind of like to live. Maybe they're never going to rock climb themselves, but you know, to play a board game rock climbing, or maybe they're never going to surf, but to play a game where they can imagine that they're a surfer. I think that's still pretty cool. So with this next game, like Aridia, like I don't even know where to begin. It is so huge and so for lack of a better word, I guess well thought of, I guess is the way. Like it blew me away when I saw this campaign. I'm going to show on the screen for people here if I can get back to your actual page. Already there we are. So starting off at the top, you finished off with 10,577 backers. Congratulations on that.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean you hit
amazing.
Almost $4 million. I don't know if this is in Canadian or US dollars, but either way, it's over $1 million, which is huge. Congrats on that.
Insane, yeah.
Before we get into the guts of the game, which again, like there's this, I can scroll forever. There's so much in here. Where'd you come up with the idea for this game? And when did you start working on it?
Those are great questions. So I started working on it in 2014. So when the original Zaya campaign, when I sent the final files to the printer, I was like, okay, what do I want to do next? And being the nerd that I am, I was like, I love sci-fi and I love fantasy.
Yeah.
So I just did a sci-fi game. Let's do a fantasy game. And so that was sort of the genesis of it. It was, I want to do a fantasy game. What could I do? And at the time I had been talking to my board game group, and I was considering doing a D&D campaign for them. So I was like, this will be really fun. I'll run like a weekly D&D campaign. We'll play through, because we had played like Descent, like version 1 Descent, and everybody loved it. And I ran the campaign. So I was like, how hard could a D&D campaign be? And I started looking into it. I was like, I'll just get like the quick start box or whatever with everything in it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, like, there was the red box, but it had like just some paper stuff, and it was just a starter. And I couldn't find like there wasn't a box that you could buy that was like the game.
Yeah.
And so I did a bunch of research, and it's like, okay, I borrowed books from people, and I found out, I was like, if I'm going to do this, it seems like I'm going to be doing like 2 or 3 hours of prep every week for this game that's going to be great for 3 people or 4 people if you include me. And so I thought, okay, I want to do a fantasy game for Far Off Games, and I want to do this D&D campaign. What if I just put all the work into making basically like a D&D in a box. So someone who wants to run a campaign for their friends could just buy this box and play RPG. And so that was sort of the start of it. Was I was going to do this D&D campaign, and maybe I'll just make it into a product. And so that was 2014. So 7+ years, something like that ago. And so from then it sort of snowballed into like, okay, well, what are my favorite things about fantasy games? And like, I loved playing. I played, before there was World of Warcraft, there were MUDs. I don't know if you know what that is, where they're like online text-based. It's basically World of Warcraft, but it's all text.
Okay.
So you're reading and typing like attack the dog, or, whatever it is. And not dogs. I don't know why I said dog. You'd attack goblins or something bad. But so I was like, what if I like added some stuff of that? So like some narrative, and in those games you would move room to room, and each room would have a description. So you're in the house, and there's like water dripping in the corner, and you could like interact with the water of like, oh, and it's a puzzle or something like that.
Yeah.
And so just all these sort of ideas, playing the game Skyrim on computer.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, I love open world games. What if I did this as an open world game? And so all these sort of ideas over the years just sort of started compressing. And at one point I had basically 2 fully cohesive designs. One was basically a fantasy version of Zaya. So you sit down and you go from start to finish, and it's competitive every time.
Yeah.
And it's like a fantasy sandbox. And then the other one was what Aridia became, which is a campaign that you play cooperatively. Mm-hmm. And over the course of successive playthroughs, you and your friends get to explore this world together. And both those ideas were really strong for me. I was like, I would play either of these. Which one do I want to do? And I felt like I already did Zaya, so why not try something new? Just as a designer, that's always like, what's the new thing? What's the new thing?
When I was looking through the player boards and the player pieces, the first thing I thought of was a video game, and Skyrim. Yeah. Actually, I'm like, this is as close as you can get to playing this as a video game, right on the board. Like sure. I have not seen anything like this. It replicates the video game experience as well as you do here in terms of the RPG. And Skyrim is a great analog for that. Everything from even your player boards where you're equipping your weapons and so forth. And then, you run out of time. So then, okay, well, that player board I can actually stack on top of all my pieces, and it goes in a folder. And we want to play again tomorrow or next week, I can pull it out and it's going to start right exactly where I left off. It's like saving your game, right?
Totally. Yep.
The exploration I was showing on the screen here while we're talking, I'm going to see if I can find it again. This idea where you're exploring the map and you're pushing down on here it is right here. I got to show people. People are watching. People listening.
Oh yeah. Okay,
go check out the page.
I can't see what you're showing.
If you're listening, go check out the Kickstarter page. You will be blown away by the visuals of what this game does in these different mechanics. But you've got these little, no worries. But you got these little pieces. You push down on the hexes, and it pops up, and then you can flip it over, and so you're exploring your world as you go along. And then each of those, you then you zoom in, and now you're going to play like a dungeon, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? Of each of those places. Then when you're in there, you've got loot boxes, which are randomized that different people can have, and you can find treasure, and you get different treasure than the other guy, and you're equipping it onto your player, and it's. I know I sound excited, but it's because I am. Like when I was reading through this.
Oh man, me too. It's so cool.
Yeah, it is so awesome. The maps. And can you talk a little bit about the art? Who did the artwork for this?
Yeah, so we had a couple different artists actually. So in 2015, I started working with Mr. Cuddington, the husband and wife team out of Quebec. And we worked on Tavarua with them, and they were so awesome to work with. And so I talked to them, and so they did the cover art. And like all the monsters and items, and they did the they did a lot of the concepts for the graphic design, and so they really like did all the key art in that sense. And that cover art, man, it took us months. We did like different revisions just to get like, we wanted to hit that right note of nostalgia and exploration and that like open world feeling. And so I'm like so pleased with how well David and Lena did with that. And then they got hired by another company in like 2018. And so I started looking. So they sometimes will do different pieces. I'm like, hey, I needed one more monster or something, and they'll like sketch it out for me and do it. But from there, we were working with an artist out of Germany named Philip Ock. And he's been fantastic. He took all of the graphic design key art that Mr. Cuddington did, and he sort of extrapolated that out and did all the icons and like did all the hard work of building those things out into like real cards. And he's also from there branched out into doing some of our, we have kind of like cutscene art. So as you're playing the game, there'll be like these full on like scenes that it's like, this is what's happening right now at important moments in the game. And he's doing those, which is fantastic. So
I even think it's cool. Like the show I was scrolling by a little bit earlier where you come into like, if you enter like a house and then the roof of the house, you flip it over and now you see inside the house, right? Like, again, like a video game.
Yeah,
like it's very, very clever the way you've approached this. And then that's not even getting into the painted minis. Can you talk about these painted minis? Like where you can, again, like in a video game, right? Where it's like, oh, I want that character to look different. Well, guess what? You can do that with this game. You can take the head off and put, I want that one to be an orc, or I want to take the head off and make it a human. And you can change the class based on how the body is. And then, but they're pre-printed, so you don't have to worry about painting. Everything's ready to go. What was the inspiration behind that? Was it the Zaya that kind of led you down that path, or?
Yeah, I mean, Zaya was a big deal for me. Having pre-painted miniatures really makes me happy. Like having a board, having a game with painted miniatures makes me really happy. So like my copy of Descent, I painted all of them, and it took me 300 hours or something like that. And a lot of like some of the things that you've talked about, like the quick saving and the hexagons that flip over and they stay in the board. A lot of the design consideration for Aridia has been, how can we make a game that's accessible for people who, like me, have a job and children and limited gaming time? Like, so for me, and some of my friends, it's like money is not the biggest constraint. It's a lot of times, as far as like buying new games, it's time to play them. And so like, with Aridia, we wanted to be as considerate as possible of your time. So when you and your friends sit down, it's not like, okay, I got this game and now I'm going to spend 200 hours painting everything. I wanted to like, okay, we've painted all the miniatures for you. We've randomized all the loot for you. Everything's set up and ready for you to play, for you and your friends to sit down, eat pizza, and like play through this game and really enjoy it. And so rather than having to do prep work for a D&D campaign, I want you to just sit down and like, okay, we're going to enjoy the story all together. Nobody has to be the DM. There's no books you have to read beforehand. You don't need to know anything. You just jump in and like, you can start playing this game in minutes, basically. And so like the character creator is one thing that like for me in role-playing games, I love when it's like, I'm going to play a new game and you're going to make your character what, like, how do I want my character to look, my hairstyle and all that. And so for me, I was like, how can we like emulate that in a tiny way in this game? And so I played around with a lot of design ideas and spoke with my manufacturer, like what is physically possible in a miniature that's, 32 millimeters tall. And so I came up with this idea of like the body represents the class and your head represents your character. And so I want to be, this old grizzled orc guy, and you can take that head and then what class do you want to be? Like I want to be the rogue. So you put him in there. And so that it took years to develop, honestly. And I have like a bunch of failed prototypes where like the heads snap off because it's too small, or like they're too big so they don't fit on a board. And so like, a lot of development time went into just making those little heads switch.
It's cool. And I was just scrolling past about a minute ago, the even the player board where you equipped your characters, which again reminds me a lot of Skyrim, right? And the tiles that click in. So it's like a dual layer board. So it's not like you're just like throwing tiles on the table in front of you. Like these things, everything like nests in themselves and each other. And it's so well contained, right? I guess is the best way I kind of describe that in terms of the player experience. It is clear that you have spent a lot of time developing this game. Like there is zero doubt in anybody's mind. I think if they look at how epically huge this game is, good for you. And I'm going to show this picture again on people watching live. This is the image of all the different bodies. You got 6 bodies, you got 12 different heads. I was reading somewhere that you had something like 900 or over 900 cards, over 300 map cards, world maps. There's like 40 hours of gameplay here, metal tokens. Like there's just so much that you can do. How does the replayability work? Can people come back and like after they finish the campaign, that 40-hour investment, can they come back and do another 40 hours, or how does that work?
Yeah. So this was a big question for us. How do we handle replayability? And that was just going into making a campaign game. Like that's probably going to be the number one question people are going to ask. Like, what is the replayability of this? And so there's a number of different factors, but basically the goal for Aridia was to I called it a green legacy game. The goal was to make a legacy style game where your choices are permanent for the campaign. And the world changes as you're playing through it. So you're opening packages and you're like, oh, here's a new thing as you're playing through the game. But at the end of it, instead of tearing up cards or putting permanent stickers, you can fully reset the game. So that was like those hexes that you pop and flip over. Those were originally, I was like, well, we do stickers, I guess. And that was before I was thinking of it as a green legacy. And so that whole design came about from like, I want to be able to have it. So when you pull it out, the cool thing about legacy games, it remembers everything, right? And so this game fully remembers, like you pull the map out, here's all the things we've explored. I remember being here, all this. If we want to change the map, we can change it. But then when you're done with it, you can flip all those back, and we'll have a sheet in the rule book that will tell you, put this here and this here and put everything back how it was when you got it. And so the game is fully replayable physically, which is like point one. And then as far as content, we're providing 6 character classes, which each one has a different play style. So depending on the number of people you play with, if you played with 3 people, you'd have 3 more classes to play through with, which will provide different like combat mechanics. The monsters vary depending on the threat deck. So you'll have different encounters can play out completely differently, basically, as far as combat goes. So the combat will still be engaging and interesting. And if you're playing as a new class, then you have way more tools to like defeat enemies with, right? Story-wise, there are some beats that you will be able to make choices. In general, we wanted you, if you're playing through a 40-hour campaign, we want you to see the majority of the game.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want you to, at least for my money, I don't want you to play through and be like, wow, we missed half of it. We wanted you to be able to see stuff, because in reality, a lot of people are going to play through the campaign one time and then move on to a new game. Yeah. At least that's how I play.
Yeah.
And then for me, I have kids, so like I'll play through a campaign and then I'll want to play through again with my kids when they're a little older or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the design of Arydia, is like, we want you to experience the whole game. You can reset it, put it on the shelf, and then you can bring it out for a new group, or you could loan it to somebody or sell it if you're done, like all those sorts of things. And as far as like future, we could talk about that. Like, are there going to be expansions and stuff? We have a bunch of ideas that we could, bring out new content.
So on that note, so this game, again, there's so many details around it. So getting this to market now, I think it's next Christmas or next fall is when this thing is going to hit the market. I'm sure you've done a lot of the planning, and obviously you spent a lot of time planning this. What's kind of the next? Like, what do you guys work on like next? Do you wait till this kind of gets out because there's so much work involved in getting this to the market, or are you already as a company kind of thinking, okay, what's next on the docket, and what is that?
Yeah, so there is still plenty of work on Aridia to do, and so that is like 100% focus on getting Aridia to the printer, to the manufacturer, locking in the logistics. Logistics have gone crazy this year.
Oh yeah.
So just managing that is first and foremost. As far as what we would do in the future, we're probably going to listen to our fans and have a conversation. I have like a drawer full of ideas.
Yeah, so, most game designers do, right? Most game designers will have.
It's so easy to come up with ideas, but like, what is it that you feel passionate enough about that you want to spend years of your life doing?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. We could go back and do some more Zaya. We could do more Aridia, or we could do something new. And so I don't know.
So in the interim, the plan is get this thing to market, and then kind of see maybe what expansions or further kind of supplemental material you can maybe provide for this particular game. Is that kind of where you guys are?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've spent 7 years on it, so like
it's a long time.
It is, but it's been so much fun.
Yeah.
And I think doing an expansion for Aridia would be super fun, because all the hard work of the systems is done. And now you just get to like screw with people and like make whatever sorts of weird stories you want. Like, I think that's a lot of fun. I mean, if you've ever been a DM, you can basically just do all that kind of stuff. Like, oh, we're going to have this weird event that does this thing that takes you through a wormhole, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting to me. Or, I mean, you could really do anything.
Well, certainly you've got a massive fan base to build on.
Yeah.
Right? Over 10,000 people for this campaign. And that's during the Kickstarter campaign. Obviously, you'll get more people even to come on board after the campaign closes with, pre-orders, last minute orders, and things like that. So this is going to continue to grow as it gets on tables around the world and people start seeing it for themselves and get blown away like I was when I saw it. Those people are going to say, okay, now how can I get my hands on this game? So you can talk about second prints and so forth. So I'm sure there's enough stuff here to keep you guys occupied for a while. If somebody wants to follow you and your company's journey, like if they want to be part of kind of the ecosystem so they get regular updates, how do they do that? How best do they do that with your games?
So if you go to our website, faroffgames.com, we have a newsletter, and we send the newsletter out. We try and do it monthly, or whenever there's something useful for us to send out.
Yeah.
You can follow us on Twitter @faroffgames, Instagram @faroffgames, Facebook /faroffgames. We're Far Off Games everywhere, pretty much. Those are probably the best places. If you check, if you just type in Arydia Kickstarter, I'm going to be posting an update today after this podcast. So like, that's a place where I'm going to be really active and I'm answering people's questions there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, for anybody listening or watching, so in the show notes of the podcast, both on YouTube as well as in the audio podcast, we'll put a link to the Kickstarter page. So if people are interested, at the very least, go check it out. Just if you geek out over games and game design, check out the page. If you're looking to do a late pledge as well, you can check out the page. If you're looking for it on Kickstarter, Arydia is spelled ArYdia. So ArYdia. Type that in, you'll find the game from Far Off Games. And Cody, I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I know you have got to be crazy busy right now with such a massive campaign. But it's so cool to see people have this kind of success in this board game industry. So I want to congratulate you guys and your team on that and wish you all the best. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you. I mean, again, thank you so much for bringing me on the podcast. It's super fun. And yeah, thank you to all the viewers and listeners.
And it was great having you. All righty, you take care. Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply join the Facebook group Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.